I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just introducing our actual entertainment here. So this is Robert Kepke, aka Torvald, the Viking Home Companion. So Robert, you've been a performer for about 40 years now, right?
Yep.
Doing this a while.
Yep.
Yeah. I think I already said most of it. Oh.
Okay.
I didn't memorize the whole thing here. Yes, come on.
Well, that's okay. We all love ad-lib.
Indeed. So Robert has come to us from a variety of places, including Denmark at various Scandinavian festivals, right? And on various Norse boats, including most recently the Draken. Very nice. Had a brief stint on there earlier this afternoon.
Yep. I've told a few stories over there. It was a lot of fun in a perfect setting.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, in our less perfect setting, but slightly warmer setting, he's going to be telling us stories from his Viking Home Companion series of stories, I suppose.
Yep.
So, I'm going to stop talking and then you can...
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. We are going to be taking a trip back in time, back to the age of the Vikings. But before we do that, let's talk about that word, Viking. Because you're going to hear me kind of bouncing back and forth between using the word Viking and using the word Norse. Well, excuse you. And the reason for that is that actually back in the Viking age, people didn't talk about being a Viking. Because Viking isn't something you are. You go Viking, you do Viking. Viking is an action, okay? It is not a person. We modern people have come to think of it that way, but that isn't actually how it worked. So to give you an idea of what it means to go Viking, we have people that, of course, were nothing more than raiders. They always got on their ships and they went out and basically were pirates. And then we have the Norse that were essentially nothing but traders. They would go out with their ships and they would run the long trade routes. But given the proper circumstances, both would do either. And that's actually what the word Viking means. The word Viking means I go trading and or raiding. It's a multi-purpose word here. So to give you an idea how that might work, let's say that I'm a trader and I have just come up into your village on my ship, setting up, and you know what, I really like your purse there. I've got some fur, I've got some silk and other fabrics, I will trade you for your purse. And you say, no, you don't want to trade. Okay, fine, you don't want to trade. Tell you what then, I will buy it. I've got silver, I've got gold, I've got amber, I've got white salt, which believe me, white salt was very expensive back in those days. People used it as money. As a matter of fact, back in Roman times, the Romans were paid with salt, okay, a lot of times. So I will buy that purse from you, and you say, no, it's not for sale. Okay, now you're being unreasonable. Because there is nothing in the world so valuable that you shouldn't be willing to discuss the possibility of a trade or a sale. Now, you may put a price on it that I'm not willing to pay, but you shouldn't just be saying no. So now I got to ask myself two questions. Question number one, am I strong enough to take it from you? Now, if the answer to that question is yes, now the more important second question comes in. Is this a regular stop on my trade route, and therefore I need to maintain the goodwill of the people where I am at? The answer to that question is yes, fine, keep your purse. The answer to that question is no, you know, I'm never coming back through here. I'm on my way somewhere else and I'm going to loop back around to go home. But you know what? At some point today, you're going to be by yourself and that purse is coming home with me. So Viking, again, it's an action. It's something that you did. Actually, in the period, when you're talking about the western portion of Europe where the Norse were raiding, England, Ireland, Scotland, France, any of those areas, the generic term for the Norse was Dane. If you spoke Old Norse, they called you a Dane. They didn't care if you were from Sweden or Norway or Iceland. You're just a Dane because that's the language you're speaking according to them. That whole area of England, known as the Danelaw, was settled also by Norwegians, but everybody called them Danes. If you look at all of the descriptions of that period in Ireland, when they talk about the Norse coming in and fighting and conquering, what are they talking about? They're talking about the Danes. You know, the Danes came and landed here. The Danes established Dublin. The Danes fought so-and-so at such and such. They keep throwing the word Dane around because that was the generic term that they used in that area for the Norse. So now that we have just a little bit of an education, so you'll be a little less confused as I bounce around between using it in the modern sense and using the actual word Norse, let's get into some of the stories. So we're going to start with the story that actually launched this entire series. As she mentioned, I have a whole series of stories. I think I'm up to around 16 or 17 now. And actually, if you enjoy these stories, you can actually take them home with you. I do have them recorded on CDs. The albums are available at the Knotted Bone Merchant out on the green out there. They've got the big A-frame pavilion with the pouches and the leather and the pipes and so on, so you can find them there. And these are all brand new CDs, actually. They've just recently been recorded, so everything's kind of updated and new on them. I'm very proud of them. So, now we've had the commercial break. Let's go ahead and say, Torvald, get back to the stories. So the first story is the one that launched the entire series, and it is known as Halfdan's New Longboat. You know, it's been quite the while since I've been back to my old home village of Skog. Here I've been out to Viking, you know. So I decided to go back, hook up with my good buddy Sven, catch up on all the new ones. And we decided to head up into town there, and I noticed there was a new longhouse up on the edge of town. So I go, hey Sven, what's with the new longhouse there? Did somebody new move into town? And he says, no, that's just a new berserker longhouse, see? And we keep all the berserkers up in there now. Whatever it takes to keep them happy, we send it to them. If they want beer, we send them beer. If they want food, we send them food. If they want women, we send them more beer. And I go up there and I look, and you know, they got the doors closed, and there's a bar across the outside, and there's a little sign above it that says, in case of war, break bar. And there's a whole lot of noise coming from inside there. So I go, hey Sven, what's the little noise there? And he goes and looks in through the window and he says, oh, they're just having an axe catching contest. Okay, Sven, you mean they're having an axe throwing contest? No, they're having an axe catching contest. Ow, whoa, Harold just missed. That is going to leave a scar, and that is not a pretty sight. So we head down into town after that, and we see everybody hanging out down by the fjord. So we go to see what they're looking at down there. Halfdan got himself a new longboat, and he is so happy about this new longboat, although he's a little sketchy the details of how he got it. Something along the lines of the old owner don't need it no more. Yeah, sure, you betcha. And I have to admit, it's a pretty nice longboat. You know, there's a few axe blows on the side, a little fire damage up on the one end, but other than that, it's in really good shape. But I also noticed there's about 30 oars to a side on that there longboat, you know, and nobody going to tell Halfdan that's more able-bodied men than we got in the whole village to row it. Well, you know, Wiglaf, he did start to say something, but a little foot-to-foot communication and a quick swim in the fjord, and he quieted right down. Okay, well maybe he didn't exactly quiet right down, because we weren't too far out of the vineyard, and the fjord was mighty cold, and he wasn't too happy about taking the Weisswater bath. But he didn't say needing to Halfdan, and that's a good thing. So anyway, like I say, Halfdan, he's really happy about this new longboat of his. He decides he wants to go oar dancing. Now this is a problem, because as I said, we don't have enough able-bodied men to man all the oars there, so we piled the whole village into the boat. All except the berserkers, we kept them up there in their longhouse. But we piled the whole village into the boat, and we're all hanging onto the oars on just the one side there, and in some places we got 2 and 3 kiddies to an oar, hoping they kind of just hold them down. Well, anyway, he goes and he jumps out of the back of the boat, he lands on the oars, he runs up the side of the boat, he jumps in the front of the boat, we all let go of the oars from one side, we're running to the other side, we're trying to get the oars out before he jumps off the front of the boat, and we don't make it. And he lands right down in the water, right next to Wiglaf, and he ain't no happier about taking no Weisswater bath than Wiglaf is, I can tell you that. About that time, we decided we wanted to go back up into town because nobody wanted to be there when Halfdan came up out of the water. He may not be a berserker, but he ain't all that far off, neither. Well, that's the story from the village of Skogner, and I'll let you know the next time I go back for a visit. Yeah, sure, you betcha. So, show of hands, how many people think the Berserker Longhouse was something that the Norse actually did? Have a place to stuff the berserkers in and lock them up? Anybody? Show of hands? Okay, couple. Well, that was a trick question, because the answer to that one is actually yes or no. First of all, you got to understand that the berserks were kind of like the tactical nuclear weapon of the Viking Age. Okay? You got them together, you point them in a direction, you say kill, and you stay out of the way. Wait to see that when the battle's over, how many of them come wandering back afterwards. And the thing was, though, that while the rest of Europe thought of the Vikings as being loud, obnoxious, smelly, and violent, the Vikings thought of the berserks as being loud, obnoxious, smelly, and violent. So if you weren't actively engaged in combat, you really didn't like to have them around. The only problem was, back then, you never really knew when you were going to be actively engaged in combat. So if you were one of the nobles of the Jarls, a Herser, a Jarl, or a king, you almost always had to keep 3 of these guys around, kind of like on retainer. But you didn't like to have them around everybody else, and so you would set up a section of your compound that was just for them. And you literally did try to give them anything you could to keep them happy and keep them from there. Because if they came out of that area, damage was going to ensue. Property damage, livestock damage, personal damage, building damage, it didn't matter. If the berserks got bored, something got broken. Okay? And so you really did just try to keep them happy and keep them in there. Or dancing. How many people think that or dancing was something they actually did? Wow, only a couple. Well, actually, yes. The sagas actually do mention many times the art of oar dancing, and it's almost exactly what I just described. You would jump out of the boat onto the oars, and you would run up the side of the boat on the oars, back in, over the other side, right back down, and right back in. And it was a way of displaying your dexterity, your coordination, your balance, and so on. Although I honestly believe it probably started off as something more or less like, here, hold my meat and watch this. Axe catching. How many people think they actually played axe catching?
No.
Hey, I got at least one hand down there. Well, you know what? Yes and no. That's also kind of a trick question. We do know, of course, that they did use throwing axes, and they threw axes at everybody. They didn't expect them to catch them with their hand, you know, and they expected to get hit by them. However, the sagas do tell us about a different skill that's very similar, that was actually considered very noteworthy, and that was the art of spear catching. Okay? Now, caveats to this. First of all, this was not a one-on-one skill. This was not me throwing the spear at you and you catching the spear. Right? This is a wartime skill. When the Norse would go to war, they would form these big shield walls, and they would advance towards each other. And actually, almost all of the shieldmen would carry 2 or 3 light, short spears in their shield hand. They were really not much more than javelins, and they would throw these as they're advancing. But then they would also have folks behind the shield wall who were doing nothing but chucking throwing spears. And so during this line advance, if you were one of the people in the back and you could see a spear coming in, there is an actual trick to catching the spear as it's coming down, spinning and throwing it back. I know I've done it. Not with those spears. Not quite that silly. But some friends and I have practiced this where we take and make spears out of pieces of PVC pipe and put a big bulky tip on the front so we wouldn't kill each other. And we would stand about 30 feet apart or so and throw them and see if we could get the trick down. And you can. You can catch it like this and turn and spin, and as you turn and spin, you chuck it right back. So you're maintaining as much momentum as you can with it and then adding strength as you throw it back. And that is actually mentioned in this saga several times, along with the ability to throw 2 spears simultaneously. Once again, this is warfare, volley fire. Get as many going as you can. But they would practice being able to throw 2 spears and hit a target about the size of a dinner plate. Okay, so we've had some education along with the fun, so let's get back into the stories here. So we were just talking about oar dancing, and according to the sagas, not only could someone do this when the oars are being held straight for them, but supposedly the greatest of heroes could do this while the ship is being rowed. Well, this next story is going to have a spot in it and demonstrates why that's not a good idea if you don't happen to be one of those great heroes. And the name of this story is Going Viking. You know, not too long ago, Halfdan got himself a new longboat. And he was so happy with this new longboat, he decided he wanted to go a Viking. Now, the only problem was that this boat's got about 30 oars to a side on it, and that's more able-bodied men than we got in the whole village to row it. So we had to go up to the big town, up to Viborg there. And of course, Norseman being what Norseman is, all we had to do is get in the middle of town and yell, "Hey, who wants to go Viking?" And we get a whole chorus of, "Yeah, sure, you betcha." The next thing you know, we not only have enough men for his boat, we got 2 more boats going. Now, we did have to go back to Skagnir first and pick up the berserkers, because you don't dare go a Viking and leave the berserkers behind. Believe me, you don't want to have to deal with them if you get back and they find out they weren't invited to the party. So we ended up with 3 of them on our boat. We had Bjorn Saxonbane, we had Bjarki Axecatcher, and we had Hakon the Lame. Now, if you've ever been Viking before, you know it takes a little while to get from Denmark over to England there across the North Sea. We get out there and we're sailing along pretty good, the wind is blowing, but then the wind dies down and we have to break up the oars and start to row. So we take Big Laugh and we put him in the back of the boat with the drum to help us keep time. Boom, row, boom, row, boom, row, and off we go. Problem is, by now the berserks are all bored, and Bjorn manages to convince Bjarki to have an axe catching contest. on a longboat in the middle of the North Sea. Well, nothing anybody could say could change their minds, so the Yarky got up in the front of the boat, Bjorn got up in the back of the boat, and they started throwing the axe back and forth. Well, we didn't need a drum to keep time anymore. It was pretty easy. Stroke, duck, stroke, duck, stroke, duck, stroke, duck. And we're yelling and screaming at the two of them to knock it off. But you know, they're just having too much fun. They ain't paying attention to us. But then the Yarky starts to get just a little bit upset, because he is the champion axe catcher of the whole business there, and Bjorn wasn't missing none of these. So he picked up another axe and started throwing it. Boy, we took off like a shot. Stroke, duck, stroke, duck, stroke, duck, stroke, duck. And we're yelling and screaming at two of them to knock it off. We go right between the other two boats. We have to stick their oars over the ear so we don't cut them off. And we're yelling and screaming, and finally the oar misses his hold on the axe. It turns sideways in his hand, hits him in the head, and knocks him out. Phew! We just kind of let the oar thing get caught there for a little while the other two boats catch up to us, snickering up their sleeves at us. And we lock the axes in the sea chest for the rest of the trip. So we go back to rowing. Boom, stroke, stroke, stroke. But we've got another problem, because we have a third berserker on board. And he's just as bored as the other two was. Although after he saw what happened to Bjorn, he wasn't going to try and play axe catching with the Yarky. But he decided, since we had the oars out already, that he was going to go oar dancing. Hack on the lane. Nothing anybody could say can change his mind any more than we could with the other two, so he jumps out of the side of the boat, he lands on the oar dips down into the water, his foot slips off, he whacks his head on the side of the boat, and goes right into the water out cold. It was lucky for him that Half-Dan saw what he was doing and tied a rope onto the back of his belt, but the whole boat had to stop rowing just to haul him back in again. Although there were a few snickers about how good an anchor he made, and we might just leave him down there. But no, we go ahead and pull him back up into the boat, kind of wring him out a little bit, toss him over to the side, throw a blanket on him, and we finally make it over to England. Thank the gods. But you know, we had to row up and down the coast there for a little while, because, you know, there weren't a whole lot of Saxon villages left at that point. We finally managed to find one, and we pull right up onto the beach. And right now, the berserks are all bored again, so they run right off the end of the boat into the water, up onto the beach, and there you go. You got Bjorn Saxon Dane out in front, you got the Yarky axe catcher right behind him, and bringing up the rear was Hack on the Lane. So we get out of the boat, we get our armor on, we get our weapons ready, we get in marching order, we go trooping up to the village, and of course by the time we get there, the berserks have done their job. Saxons are all dead or gone, and that was when Hakon finally got there from his full charge from the beach, frothing at the mouth, chewing on his axe, and looking at the rest of us. So we figured we better give him something to do. So we had him help us round up the livestock. He wasn't too good at it, yelling and screaming and hacking and chopping at him, but at least he wasn't yelling and screaming and hacking and chopping at us. But he also wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to where he was going. Ran right into the pig swallow. Right up to his neck and all that stinky stuff. Now, you know, berserkers aren't too particular about how they smell. Although in Skagnir, we've got the cleanest berserkers in all of Scandinavia. They take 2 and 3 baths a year whether they need it or not. But even they were turning up their nose at Hakon. So we had to give him a bath. Now the trick to giving a berserker a bath is you have to get his axe away from him first. And let me tell you, you ain't seen nothing more pitiful than a grown berserker cry when you take his axe away. But we finally get his axe away from him, and we dunk him in the ocean and we give him a bath. And we give him another one after that, and we give him another one after that. We had to give him a bath every day for a whole week before we could get him back on the boat. Of course, by then the berserks were all calling him Hack on the Lieback. There were a few less berserks on the way home, though. That's the good thing. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to have to think real hard before the next time I go Viking on Half-Dan's new boat. Yeah, sure, you betcha. Now, this story dealt a lot with the Viking longships. And we have, of course, an example of one of them over here, the Harald Fair there on the other side of the Morgan. And what made the Norse so dangerous with their raids across Europe were actually these ships. And the reason for that is these ships are incredibly fast, incredibly maneuverable, and the normal longship only has a draft of about 3 feet. That means it only needs about 3 to 4 feet of water to be able to float and maneuver. And so, you know, all these villages that are 10 to 20 miles inland from the coast, but happen to be near a creek that's got about 3 feet of water in it, shallow enough that you could wade across it, here comes a longship. all the way up and in, hit, take everything, get back on the boat, lift the steering oar up out of the water, and just right back on down the creek to the ocean. Now the ships themselves are, there was a really great special on this on TV about the mechanics and the physics of these long ships. And I'm going to give you kind of a condensed version of some of this, and it's got to do with the clinker-built design of the hull. Okay? Clinker-built means that the planks all overlap over top of each other. They're not smooth, like the Morgan, which is right next to it. The way that a longship was built is you would build the keel first, and then you would actually build the hull up from the keel, and then you add the ribs inside to help stabilize its shape. Now, what this does, though, is it creates that series of overlapping grooves along the side of the ship. Now, when the ship is traveling through the water, what happens is it agitates the water and creates little bubbled streams of air pockets all along the hull, which makes it smooth through the water faster. This actually is the same way that sharks swim so quickly. If you look at shark skin under magnification, the little scales on their skin, they all have ridges and grooves on them, and exactly the same thing is happening. They get that little cavitation of air right along their scales, and it moves through the water faster. So these ships, for their size, were much faster than people expected them to be. And even under sail, you can row at the same time to even add an even bigger boost of speed, so you can get places faster than most people expected you to. They were also incredibly seaworthy. One really great thing about the contrast between having the Morgan there right next to the Harold Fairhair is you look at the Morgan and understand this, that every single place the Morgan has ever been able to go, that longship right next to it went to the same place. Even though it's that much smaller than the Morgan is, it could go everywhere the Morgan went. So the ships were really kind of the thing, aside from just their fighting skill, that made the Vikings so dangerous. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll move on into the next story. We're finishing up what I call my longboat trilogy, because these were the first three stories that really launched everything, and they all link into each other, because we're all talking about the longboat. So this next story here is called Halfdan's Funeral. You know, not too long ago, Halfdan got himself a new longboat. And a lot of people have been asking me why, because he already had a pretty nice longboat to start with. Well, I didn't know, so I went on back to Scotland, hooked up with my good buddy Sven, and he told me the story. See, it wasn't too long after they had built the new Berserker longhouse, and Halfdan, although he weren't a berserker, he weren't all that far off either, he liked to go up there and party with them. And the last time he went up there, he had such a good time that when he left, he forgot to put the bar back across the outside of the door. Now, he didn't make it all the way home. He got about halfway there, and he passed out in the street, and that was the point the Berserks found out that they weren't locked in. They got loose, and they ran all over town. And they found him laying out there in the street, and they rolled him over. Now, the thing was that when Hakon had passed out, he had fell down on his face, and he broke his nose, and blood spurted out all over his beard there. And when the Berserks saw that, they figured he must be dead, so they had to give him a Viking funeral. So they pick him up, and they carry him down to the pier. They put him on his boat. They piled up a whole bunch of wood around him and soak it down with oil. Then they take a dog and put it down there by his feet, and then they ran into their first problem. Because no matter how much they tried, they couldn't get none of the women in town to go on the boat to go up to Valhalla with him. They kept on trying until Bjarki's Wapildi came out with her battle axe, and well, they gave up on that idea. So they put a sheep on there instead. I guess they figured a girl's a girl. Now, there were two problems with that, yes. Only two problems with that. Sven pointed out to them that Halfdan wasn't a Norman, and therefore a sheep wasn't really appropriate. But even if it had been appropriate, it wouldn't have done no good, because it was a boy sheep and not a girl sheep. But they were having so much fun, they just really didn't care. They went ahead and they put the sheep on the boat, and they pushed it out into the fjord, and that was when somebody pointed out to them that they forgot to light it on fire. So Hakon went back and got a bunch of torches, and then him and Bjarki and Bjorn all took turns throwing torches out there until they finally managed to land one on the boat, and it caught fire. At that point, the dog decided it had enough. It didn't mind being on the boat, but nobody said nothing about no fire. So it jumps over the side, and it swims back to shore. The sheep, on the other hand, didn't jump over the side, but it started by, and by, and by, until finally all that and woke up Halfdan. Now at first, I was trying to figure out how some silly sheep got out of its pen and got into his long haul. Then he smelled smoke. And then he figured, okay, I didn't make it all the way home. Maybe I passed out down by the blacksmith shop, and that's not too far from the sheep's pens. And then he realized, though, that he wasn't just smelling smoke, but his feet were getting awfully warm. So he opened up his eyes to look, and he saw that his feet weren't just getting warm, his feet were on fire. So he jumped up, and he's yelling, screaming, shouting, and stomping, and the sheep decided it had enough, and it jumped over the side. And that was when Halfdan realized that he wasn't in his long haul, he was on his boat, and his boat was on fire. So now he's yelling and screaming and dancing around, splashing water over the side, trying to put the fire out. And the berserkers are all laughing and shouting and pointing, look, he's going to Valhalla, he's going to Valhalla, where's the Valkyries, where's the Valkyries? And that was when he figured out he wasn't going to be able to put out that fire, and he jumped over the side. And everybody else decided to go back up into town because nobody wanted to be there when Halfdan came up out of the water. And he did. He was cold, he was wet, and his hair and his beard were smoking. They didn't have a whole lot of trouble getting the berserks back in their longhouse that night. But I'll tell you what, the next time you want to go up there and party with the berserks, better make sure when you do that you put that bar back across the outside of the door. Yeah, sure, you betcha. Now that story dealt with what is probably the most iconic image that people have when it comes to discussing a Viking tomb. Big, flaming, burning longbow burial. But you know the thing is, the only source we have for a burning ship burial came from an Arab explorer that was written about in the book Eaters of the Dead that ended up being included in the movie 13th Warrior. And that's it. There is no mention of burning ship burials in the sagas. There is no mention of burning ship burials in any of the chronicles of any of the people around the Norse, not the Saxons, not the Jutes, not the Frisians, not the Franks, not the Germans, nobody. There's no mention at all of a burning ship burial other than that one source. Now that isn't to say that ships do not play a part in Norse burial practices, because they actually do. They make a huge part of Norse burial practices. Now early on in the Viking Age, we have cremation was something that a lot of the Norse tribes did, but they didn't use a ship. They just put them on a pyre, they burned them in their possessions, the idea being that the smoke would carry them and their possessions up into the afterlife. And while some of the tribes and groups did continue to use cremation as a burial practice, burial itself became much more common. But they did still use ships. Now the three most common that we know of course, are the really big ship burials. We have Gokstad, we have Osberg, and we have Sutton Hoo. Now Sutton Hoo is Anglo-Saxon and earlier than the Viking Age, but it is the same type of burial practice that we found with Gokstad and with Osberg. And just recently, over the last few years, they have discovered at least 2 or 3 more large ship burials. They haven't been excavated yet, but they have found them. But these really big ship burials were not the only ones that were done. The size of the ship really depended on how important and how wealthy the person was. So, and it wasn't just men, because I can never remember if it's Osberg or Gokstad, one of those was women. There were 2 women that were buried on the ship. One that they think was a queen, and one was either a close relative or a servant that was buried with her. But even lesser important people, less wealthy people, used to use a smaller boat. I think it was about a year or 2 ago, they discovered a Norseman buried in Scotland, and they were able to, through DNA, determine, as well as the burial goods, that yes, he was Norse, and he was buried in a ferry, one of the small rowboats there. They had pulled him up, buried him, put a cairn over it. So the ships were even for lesser important people. It was just dependent on, again, wealth and status. And if you didn't have money for a boat, when they buried you, they would take a ring of stones in the shape of a ship around your grave. So the imagery to them of the ship carrying you into the afterlife is a really big part of Norse burial practices. The closest we get to any other description of a ship burial that's similar to the burning ship burial actually is in the saga of Beowulf. And in the saga of Beowulf, the founding king of the Skilding dynasty, the royal family of Denmark, he was discovered. The major tribe of Zealand at the time found a boat that had run aground on their beach shore, and they went down and looked at it, and it was loaded up like a grave ship. It had grave goods all over it. There were furs and silver and gold and armor and weapons, everything you would expect to be with a king that's being buried, except when they went to the center of the ship where the body should be, there was a baby. And they adopted the baby, they raised it, it ended up becoming their king. His name was Skild, hence the name Skildings for the ruling family. And then when he died, they returned him to the sea the same way they found him. They put him on a ship, they loaded it up with grave goods, and they set it adrift. They didn't burn it. That's the only other description of a burial that's even close to the burning ship burial. But once again, they didn't burn it. And I think there's also been another recent discovery of a crematorium site, and I think it's in Jutland. I'm pretty sure it's like in Jutland or right in northern Germany, where there is a gigantic ship-shaped standing stone area. The stones are all gone. I mean, they're just finding where everything used to be now at this point. But it was like Stonehenge, gigantic set of ship stones and then rings of stones around it, where they find evidence of cremation burials. And so this obviously was a place where very important people were taken to be cremated. And apparently they've said that this particular site had been in use for hundreds of years before it was stopped. So all of that is about the burial practices. But of course, the image that we all think of, you say Viking funeral, what does everybody think of? Burning boat. So I had to make a story based on that. All right, so we had some more education, let's have some more fun. So we've been talking a little bit about preservers, so I'll do a story about preservers. And the thing about this is that the story behind the story can sometimes be as much fun as the story itself. And so that's what I'm going to tell you after I do this story. So the name of this story is The Berserk's 4 Solutions. You know, there's an awful lot of people that like to make fun of the Berserks, tell jokes about how dumb they are, and I have to admit I have done my fair share. But recently I have come to the realization that Berserks are not stupid. Berserks are just simple. They have learned as a group that there isn't a problem in the world, with the exception of women, that cannot be resolved by the application of one of the 4 solutions. And the 4 solutions in no particular order are eat it, drink it, burn it, kill it. Now I know there's going to be some smarty pants that says, Torvald, you're missing one of the solutions. First of all, I would like to point out I did say with the exception of women. Because as everybody knows, there is no solution to the problem of women. Also, there are children within earshot of this story, and therefore that solution is not appropriate at this time. Now, what brought me to this realization, though, was that me and the boys were out to Viking, and we were just finishing up in this Saxon village, and Sven and I were standing out in front of the church, looking up at the steeple, wondering how in the heck we're going to get the bell down. Hakon came walking by, took one disgusted look at us, and threw a torch in through the front door. An hour later, that bell came crashing right on down to the ground. You know, here we was thinking it was a big, complicated problem, but you take one of the 4 solutions, burn it, no more problem. But the true beauty of the 4 solutions is, no matter how complicated your problem gets, you can actually use more than one solution on the same problem. And I have an example of that. Not too long ago, Sven's prize bull managed to get out of its pen, smashed into Ole's kitchen garden, busted through the fence, ate up a bunch of the vegetables, trampled all over everything it didn't eat. Finally, Ole managed to get a rope around his neck and tied it up next to his long haul and said that since it had caused so much damage, it belonged to him now. Sven said, now hey, wait a minute, that ain't right. The 2 of them got to arguing about it. And they got louder and louder and louder until finally Bjarki had just had enough, and here goes his battle axe. The next thing you know, his wife Hilda came out with her butcher knives, and we cut up that bull, we cooked it, and we ate it. See, you take 3 of the 4 solutions, kill it, burn it, and eat it, no more problem. So the next time you want to make fun of the Berserks, tell jokes about how dumb they are, I suggest you remember my little story before one of them introduces you to one or more of those 4 solutions. Yeah, sure, you betcha. Now the thing is, the story behind the story actually takes a little longer to tell than the story itself, but you know, the thing is, as a performer, right? As a singer, performer, writer, whatever, people are always asking you, where do you come up with your stories? And so that's why sometimes I like to talk about the story behind the story. And if you really already understand the culture, there can be simple things that just stick in your head and take a run on their own. And so that's kind of what happened here. I belong to a historical group called the Society for Creative Anachronism. And within that group, not only do I perform like this with my stories and such, but I'm also well known to be a leather worker. I make hard leather armor for the group that people can fight. And I lived for a long, long time out in California, about 26 years. But I sold my armor online and at events around like this. But I also was a storyteller, and I had started recording all of these stories, and I also do some songs and so on, and the CDs were being sold by merchants at various events around. And then I finally moved back east here. I moved to Pennsylvania, and I went to my first big event called Penzing. It takes place at Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, up north of Pittsburgh every year. It's a 2-week-long event, all medieval. Big war, 3,000 people in armor out there banging on each other, 12,000 people all there camping. It's a really huge event. And so I set up to sell with a merchant friend of mine, and I had my armor all laid out on the table, and I had some of my CDs off to the side. Now the thing was, is while people knew Torvald the armorer, and people knew Torvald the storyteller, they didn't realize it was the same Torvald. And throughout this whole event, I kept having people coming up going, "Oh, you're that Torvald!" I actually have a t-shirt now that says, "Yes, I am that Torvald." And on the back it actually says, "But I'm not the Torvald you're looking for," just to be a pain. But, so at any rate, at one point, some people come by my table and they go, "Are you Torvald?" And I go, "Yes." "Torvald Torgerson?" "Yes." "The Torvald that tells the stories?" "Yes." And of course I'm waiting to hear, "Oh, you're that Torvald." And they go, "Oh, we love your stories. We have your CDs. We've had them for years. We've got them all memorized. You're the reason that we are all a Viking household. Our entire household all decided to become Vikings because of you and your stories." And of course, while they're doing this, my ego's going like this. Because aside from the enjoyment of writing the stories and then sharing the stories and then hearing all of you laugh and get something out of them, finding out that you've inspired someone to do anything is really the icing on the cake for a performer. And so he said, "We're having this big feast up at our camp in a couple of days, and we would like you to be one of the guests of honor." I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. You know, come down and pick me up, and I'll come up." And so I did, and there was like over 100 people there. They had this nice set of tables in a U shape with a big bonfire in the middle, all sorts of food. They had guests there from other places as well. And at the end of the feast, I'm getting up to go stand out by the bonfire to tell some stories to thank them for their hospitality. And they said, "Wait, before you do, we have something we want you to see." Okay? They bring out this 3-foot by 3-foot scale model of a Saxon village. And it's got little buildings with thatched roofs, it's got a church with a steeple and a bell in it, it's got a pen with a bunch of sheep in it, and they set it down next to the fire, and they bring out some wooden matches that they light like torches, and they light the village on fire. They light the buildings on fire, the church on fire, the sheep on fire, and as I'm standing here watching this village burn, the steeple disconnects from the church and goes, "Ew." And the first thing that popped into my head was, and me and Sven are standing out in front of the church wondering how the heck we're going to get the bell down. And that's where the story came from. So it's just the little things sometimes that'll get you going on a story. I've got 2 stories I'm working on now that I was inspired to do by my trip to Denmark last year. While I was at the Viking market there in Copenhagen, one of my hosts had made an offhand comment. There was somebody setting up an A-frame pavilion that they were going to use to sell beer and water and coffee out of. But they had been 3 days trying to set up a Viking A-frame tent, which is like one of the simplest types of tents that you could possibly set up. And my friend made this comment of how many people does it take to set up a Viking tent? Because, you know, kind of like that, you know, how many people for the light bulb type of joke. And my head just started running with it, that the founding of the village of Skogner, where all of this stuff takes place and where all of us are from, there's a story about how the village got started, and it was a couple of guys coming in on a boat into the fjord and finding the area they liked, and they pulled off onto the sand there, and they decided they were going to set up a camp in a pasture there rather than sleep on the boat that night. And there were 4 of them, and they started arguing about how to set up the A-frame tent. And actually, it was only 3 of them that were arguing about it, and 1 who was actually putting the tent up. And they got to the point where the 3 of them were pulling their weapons and ready to start fighting out of it. And the one guy says, "It's done." So they turn around and kill him. Stick him in the tent and burn it. So that's the beginnings of a new story. But it's just one of those things where it just kind of comes to you because you know the culture, you understand the references, and then an offhand comment will get you going. So let's go ahead and have a little more fun here. I'm not sure how much more time I've got. Okay, we got one more time to wrap it up. So let's do this one. I'm going to answer an age-old question. It's a question that has plagued scholars for centuries. And they make a big complicated mess out of it, and it's why did the Norse suddenly just go Viking every year? Right? They talk about population pressures, they talk about religious pressures, they talk about economic pressures, and they make this big complicated mess with a whole bunch of theories about it. Well, the answer is very simple, and I am going to share it with you. And the name of this story is, what the heck did we go Viking? So it's been quite a while since I've been back in my old village of Stock here, so I decided to go back and go to the good buddy stand and hang out for a bit. And when I got there, we decided we were going to go down and relax by the fjord for a while. On the way down there, we picked up a couple of fishing poles, so it looked like we was doing something. Because a fellow that isn't doing something is a challenge to every woman alive that finds something for it to do. So we got our fishing poles, headed on down to the fjord, kicked back to relax, tossed the lines out there, and you know, we weren't really all that serious about it. Kind of forgot to put me bait on. Then again, we didn't have any hooks or sinkers neither, but at least with the lines dangling in the water, it looked like we was doing something. So I kicked back to relax, and I look over at Sven, and I go, you know, Sven, I've been thinking. You've been what? I've been thinking. What the heck do we go Viking for? I mean, we get on a boat with 30 other guys for weeks and weeks at a time. We get cold, we get wet, we get blisters on our hands and hiney, we have a little bit of fun on the other end, and then we get back on that boat with those 30 other guys for weeks and weeks at a time, get cold, get wet, get blisters on our hands and hiney, and go home. What the heck are we going Viking for? And he says, you know, I never really thought about it like that. What the heck do we go Viking for? I mean, it ain't as much fun over there in England as it used to be, because now they got these fellas called knights, and they're just as tough to fight as the berserkers are. And if you're going to fight the berserkers, you might as well just stay home. So what the heck are we going Viking for? And I look at them and say, yeah, you know, it doesn't pay as well as it used to neither, because we've been raiding them so often, there aren't all that many Saxon villages left, you know, because we kind of burned them down when we're done. So there ain't a whole lot of goodies over there anymore, so what the heck are we going Viking for? And he looks and he says, yeah, and you know, it doesn't do us a whole lot of good to go the other way. Because if you go east, the only place to go is Novgorod. And if you're going to go to Novgorod, you might as well go the whole way and go all the way down to the Byzantium. And if you think you're going to get blisters on your hands and hiney for rowing that boat, when do you got to pull it over land for a couple of days to go from river to river to make it on down there? So what the heck are we going Viking for? And I said, yeah, you know, it ain't as much fun down to Byzantium as it used to be neither. Because now they got the Varangian Guard. And they are berserks. And like I said before, if you're going to fight berserks, you might as well just stay home. So what the heck are we going Viking for? And right about then, Sven's wife Trudy comes out, and she said, Sven, Torvald, get up here and start splitting the wood. It ain't going to split itself, you know. And we got to get started on the lutefisk, or we're not going to have enough to get us through the winter. And somebody forgot to put the bar back across the door of that berserk longhouse, and they got loose, and they're running all over town, and you got to go round them up. And I looked over at Sven and said, how long do you think it's going to take us to round everybody up? And he said, I don't know, but it sure is time to go Viking. Yeah, sure, you bet. I wish it was more complicated than that, but it's all about getting away from the chores. Well, thank you very much. That's the end of the program today. I will be performing again tomorrow, 11 o'clock and 2:30 right here. I am also doing wandering storytelling. You know, if you see me out wandering around and you'd like to hear another story, please don't hesitate to come up and ask. I said, I've got 16 of them, and you only heard about 4 or 5, so just beware that it's much easier to get me to start talking than it is to get me to shut up. It's an occupational hazard. Thank you very much. And the commercial announcement, if you didn't hear it before, these are all recorded, available for sale at the Knotted Phone out on the green. The current show CD has over 2.5 hours of stories and commentary. So good for long drives. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed.